Welcome to Dungeon Master Talk, the podcast specifically for Dungeon Masters by Dungeon Masters. I am Dungeon Master Kyle, and with me today is...
I'm Dungeon Master Shay. Kyle, it's so good to be back here talking about D&D again.
Dude, that is the most factual statement anyone has ever said to me ever.
At least on this show, anyway.
Okay, fair. I've probably been told water is wet at some point in my life.
I think I believe somebody when they said, I think a fish got thirsty or something like that. I was pretty gullible as a kid.
That's pretty meta. So, Shay, what are we talking about today?
We are talking about dungeons. Here, there be dungeons. Not dragons yet, just dungeons.
Can there not be a dragon in the dungeon?
There probably could be,
Underground dragon.
but for right now, we need to get the players in the dungeon to actually find said dragon. So let's start with the maps and the dungeons. But before we do that, we owe you guys an update on our games. Kyle, where are we?
So in my campaign, so last episode, if y'all have listened to this in order, you've heard that we ended off with my rogue in a pretty bad way, downed in the middle of a battlefield by, harking back to last episode, the BBEG, Ezekiel himself, and things looked pretty bad. Well, we actually had a returning player, someone who left my campaign earlier on due to life getting just, hectic and schedule wasn't going to work out. So he had to step away. He made a return, saved our rogue. And it was a really powerful moment. We were all virtual for this one, which is a little bit abnormal for my play group, but it let me do something cool where I had that player on standby. He didn't join the Discord call right off the bat.
Nice.
I gave my update and then messaged him on the side to join in, and he just said, "What's up, guys?" And
everybody lost their minds.
Oh, it popped. I had to take my headset off. It was so worth it. Actually, nice. There was a slight second where it took everybody a minute to realize who spoke.
Wait, what?
Yep, and then kind of had to reboot and re-give the update because he missed it all. So that part of the execution, I hadn't thought it through. But saved the rogue. Unfortunately, they were not able to save the city. So the city I made, this cliffside city that I put a lot of love and time into, has fallen. And the bad guys took it, and the heroes are actually literally underground in tunnels, trying to get to another city to seek help and refuge. And they have a good chunk of survivors from the city that fell with them. And that's where we ended that episode. Well, that session.
Didn't we gain another druid too?
Yes. In addition to a returning player, we onboarded a brand new player to the campaign. She's one of our other player's wife, and she wanted to play with us and has joined us in a couple of our one-off sessions, but now joined the mainline campaign proper, playing a druid. So when you return, Shay,
I've been absent for the last couple of weeks or sessions, which kind of sucks, but I'm glad that she's taken the mantle of the druid very well.
Well, sharing. You're always gonna be OG druid, man. Your character is still alive and well, and not really prospering.
Oh, thank God! I was wondering if I was going to have to roll a new character or not.
No, that's actually harking back to Session 0 rules. We do not kill off players' characters while they are absent.
That's fair.
Just because that's the easiest way to make sure that they remain absent, which we don't want.
And to be fair, Kyle has full permission to do whatever he feels he needs to story-wise to my character when I'm not there. So if I need to make a new character, I am totally okay with that. But I do love my druid, so please don't.
Yeah, I'm not. I love your druid too,
and he loves my druid, so we're good.
I see. That's my secret. I love all the player characters. So my goal is that if anything were major to happen to them, it happens while the player is in control of the character.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, Shay, how about you? Do you have any updates for us on the status of your campaign?
Unfortunately, we don't. I gave the good update last time. We're still waiting for our next session, but as of right now, they are waiting to find out who the warden is in the dungeon. Ooh. Speaking of dungeons.
It's a good lead.
I figured as much. I figured I'd bury that lead a little bit better.
Yeah, look at that, guys. We're growing. We're tying stuff. Maybe it's better if I don't call it out, though.
Yeah, right. Or like I call it out on myself. But dungeons, what is it about dungeons in Dragons or Dungeons with Dragons that just makes it so much fun?
Oh, it's really, I think like this is when we stop and think about it, or when we're describing Dungeons and Dragons, I think this is the easiest way to kind of say what it is we do, right? Because you can get, you can have everything about what is Dungeons and Dragons: role play, encounters, puzzles, traps.
Oh, traps. Yes, for sure.
Traps big time. All in this dungeon crawl, as you were. And really, when you think about it, this was so popular, so much fun, that it's become its own video game genre, i.e. games like Diablo,
Skyrim.
Path of Exile. Those are fun because innately we as humans, we like the idea of this challenge before us that we overcome and get through in a definitive endpoint, and that's a dungeon.
Mm-hmm. Oh, for sure. And I think there's just something about a spooky underground cave when you're exploring and you have no idea what's going to come out and jump at you. I mean, it's the best form of a scary haunted house in whatever season it is. So I think honestly, like, there's just something about a actual dungeon. When you're doing D&D, you can have a totally above ground campaign, and that's great, but there's just something about going underground that's just different. That being said, what are some of the ways that you like to build your dungeons? Like, do you go to more digital resources for inspiration, or Kyle, how do you usually want to do that?
I think I've said this before. And this is a little bit weird for me because in my professional world, I'm a tech guy. I don't know if I've mentioned that on this podcast before. I work in the software realm. When it comes to Dungeons and Dragons, I'm a pen and paper dude. I like to draw things out. I like to verbally describe it. I do not take much advantage of the digital tools available to me beyond actual encounter builders. I think I mentioned that in our encounters episode. But I like to draw it. I like to first map it out in my mind and then draw it out for my players so that it's all on the board and ideally using miniatures and stuff like that, but still working on that.
Oh, for sure. Like, now we are kind of the opposite. I and technology usually get in a fist fight at some point during the day.
True.
And I am actually the digital guy when it comes to this. And now I will say the caveat is the reason I am the digital guy is because one of my players lives completely out of state. Mm-hmm. So I have to find a way to bring them in to our game. Now, Kyle, I am out of state when we play your game, which is normal. And we talked about this in the second episode, I think it was, when we were talking about materials that we would need. One of the things that I utilize a lot is Roll20, because it's a digital platform map that the players can all log into, whether we're remote or we're together, minus our one, again, from out of state, that everybody can see their token on the board. They can see the board itself. I, for one, am not a great drawer. And so this helps me to at least have a better picture and give them a better picture of what I'm trying to show them over the interwebs. Now, that being said, right now we are in the middle of a pre-generated campaign. So a lot of my maps are already built for me. They're color coded, they're part of the book, and that's fine. When that session ends, I will probably build my own game and do that, the next step. All of that I'm going to probably start drawing out, and it'll be a lot cruder, but I'll still have to upload it into Roll20 so that my players can still get the gist of what I'm trying to do.
Yep. And how I handle Shay being remote is we try, and we've actually had it fall a couple times, so I don't know its functionality. We try to have a video going that he can watch and see the table. We've had it completely fail before, and we've had to resort to sending still pictures and keep sending them.
Yeah, so and that's fine too. Like, if that works for you and your group, like if that's something you and your group have to use, that's fine too. Yeah. The biggest thing is making sure that the person who is remote is very attentive to what's going on. And sometimes it's better, it's easier to do than others, but really having that attention to detail as the remote person to make sure that you're still engaged with what's going on.
Yep. And so we talking about building out what tools we're using. I think the commonality here, the fun part is that it is planned. And there is, so we talked about Roll20 here, we talked about pen and paper. There's other options. There is map generators. If you're a type of person that you can fill a dungeon no problem. When it comes to what the encounters are going to be, what the traps are going to be, you got them. But the actual building of a map and making it a fun terrain, maybe that doesn't come so naturally. That's fine. There are great tools out there, and you can find them with quick Google searches. But one that I have actually used before myself for one-offs is, I believe it was actually just called Map Generator. And I just went in there and I put the topography I wanted. Boom, I had a map. And it was me. So no, I didn't upload it to anything. I then hand drew kind of a close resemblance to it. And then once I had that close resemblance, we went with it. So those are tools available to you. And of course, feel welcome to use anything we don't mention here, like D&D Beyond and such.
There's also a couple of different things that you can get to. There are books that are literally just books filled with dungeon maps. That is a resource that you could look at too as well. And there are dungeon tiles. Like, it's just tiles that they have specific rooms, and you can, but they also have like connecting points. So you can just randomly flip tiles down. And at that point, you will never have the same dungeon twice. So if you move your parts around, or if you flip them, or however you want to do it, that's another way that you can help build the map or the dungeon for your players to kind of get engrossed into that game with you as well.
Yep. And that's actually something I'm shocked I didn't remember to bring it up. I actually do have a dungeon book that was given to me as a birthday present. And I've used it now in a one-off because it was recent.
It was a good dungeon too. I'll give them that.
Yeah, I'm actually now falling in love with this book. And so there's going to be times I'm straight up going to use the dungeon from the book. There's times I'm going to alter it because that's the type of person I am. But those resources are so much fun. They're awesome because it helped me think of stuff I wouldn't have thought of.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And again, you will more than likely never have the same dungeon twice.
No.
Unless you just find a dungeon that you just super like and you take pictures of the way it's laid out and whatever. But more than likely, you will never use the same dungeon more than twice.
Exactly. I think that's something that even if you do end up using the same dungeon layout, again, if you fill it differently and it's a different set of people, or maybe they're playing different characters this time, it's been enough time, that's going to be fine. It's more about then what's coming next. How do you then fill out your dungeon? And Shay, how do you determine when you've built your dungeon, you now have it mapped out, and it's, you got that nice underground aesthetic, you got your stalactites, stalagmites, you have the sound of water in the distance. How do you determine whether or not they should be having an encounter, solving a trap, maybe there's a puzzle? Like, how do you choose what to use, and what kind of motivates you in those moments?
It's kind of twofold. I think part of it is depending on the players themselves. It depends on how maybe loot hungry they are. Like if you have, I wouldn't say she's loot hungry, but like my rogue is very like reward based, just because that's kind of part of the backstory and things. So, and actually most of the players are kind of to an extent. So like if there's a lot of loot that I can kind of place around there, it might be a little bit more. Part of it just depends on the story itself. We were talking about in the last episode, we were talking about, is this a dungeon that an organization owns or is known to be like a holdout, like a hideout for something? Or is this something where it's just literally a random cave? That can determine all sorts of things. Like if you know this is a organization-based hideout, you're probably going to have a lot more grunt work people that are going to be on watch. You're going to have more storehouses potentially for bedrooms, for kitchen supplies, whatever. So something to take into account. Whereas if it's just like a random dungeon that you stumble upon, maybe there's lava pits. Maybe there's an acid pool somewhere. Maybe there's just an all of a sudden 50-foot drop that it's just pitch black when you're in there. So all of that to say, it really depends on the scenario of what's going on and how they got to it, I think is one of the things that I take into account when I do that.
Yeah, I think that is something that's really important to know coming into that dungeon is, why are they here? What is your end goal of the dungeon?
Yes.
Taking, for example, the one-off that I based the first season of my campaign that we did, the first couple years that we did, I was taking us through the Lost Mines of Phandelver. One of the early dungeons in that is a goblin's hideout cave combo, and there's a trap in there. And listeners, if you don't want this spoiled for you, just like fast forward the next 30 seconds. But this trap, it's a water-based trap, and it's all about if they're stealthy enough, they can avoid it. If they come stumbling in, you're going to punish them for stumbling in, because then the goblins can release this water and it'll wash them out of the cave ideally, and they have to make dex saving throws. That's something that really works well for that cave, because it's a goblin's hideout. It makes sense that they'd have a trap.
Yep.
It makes sense that they'd have guards. It makes sense then that since they're goblins, the party could sneak around them because they're goblins. There's an intelligence gap.
And it makes sense when people start throwing them off the bridge too. So, you got that going for you.
Well, you guys were doing so good when you're throwing goblins, not so good when you're throwing the rogue.
That is also true. I did not roll as well when I threw the rogue.
That's very fair. and guys, that's the magic of a dungeon. We just got to laugh about something that took place. What was that now? 2 years ago?
3
years ago. And that's something that we get to talk about, the time that they tried to throw our rogue as a spear at a group of goblins.
Yeah.
And it didn't go so good.
We tried to recreate the Gimlin. You've got to toss me. And we tossed him, and the aim was not as good as the actor portrayal, but we attempted, and we almost lost the rogue because he almost bounced off the edge of the bridge.
It wasn't a crit fail.
It wasn't, but it was real close.
Yeah, I remember him asking me, he's like, "Are you really killing me off?"
He kind of looked at me and was like, "Never again. Never again."
And you guys have held true to that. You have not thrown him since.
Yet.
Keywords. So we talked about, some things that can happen in a dungeon. It can be encounter heavy. Maybe it's waves of minions. Maybe you stumbled upon a spider's nest, and now there's a bunch of mini spiders leading you to these giant spiders, both of which are in the player's handbook.
They may or may not try to eat you. It happens.
Yeah, and I don't know about you guys. I'm the type of person that if I see one bug, I'm not totally creeped out yet, but if I see a series of bugs, I'm like, ugh.
I'm like, bye.
Yeah, like that makes me real life uncomfortable. I can't even imagine how my player would then handle that.
Right.
But then there's also that layer of puzzles. We talked about now traps and encounters, but puzzles. Puzzles are a really fun, unique thing in Dungeons and Dragons. And it's interesting as the DM to try to create a puzzle that, yes, you can draw it out, but to have a full working version of your puzzle is probably unlikely to occur. Some people, if you're that gifted with your hands that you can craft out a workable representation of the puzzle you created, more
First of all, hats off to you.
Yeah, that is amazing levels of dedication. That is incredible that you're that talented. When can we hire
you?
No
But I think the other thing that goes with that too is the ability to explain the puzzle. I think it's one of those things where we always can get this vision of a puzzle and it's this great thing. But if we don't do a great job of explaining it, sometimes it loses the luster or the magic when we explain it to our players. And so, or that causes them to struggle maybe a lot more than we thought that they should, or less than we thought that they should, because they either blew right through it and like, oh man, that was really easy, or man, this was really hard for them. It was a little bit too, for what, maybe it was overly complex, or maybe I left out a detail here or there, whatever the case ended up being. So it's one of those things, really, when you have a puzzle, I would say in your dungeon, really look to see how can I explain this the best that I can orally, not just doing the puzzle on my own and thinking about, okay, you do step. So really working on the explanation more or less is what I'm getting at.
Yeah. And don't be afraid to workshop it.
Yes.
And for this, I would encourage, find people to workshop it to that are outside your playgroup, because you don't want them to come in with the knowledge of how to solve your puzzle unless you're workshopping with them something that you're going to use a year from now or 6 months from now, and hopefully they forget. But I workshop so much stuff with my wife, and we've thanked our wives a lot on this show, so I'm gonna do it again. Thank you so much, honey. Yes, thank you for letting me be here recording this right now. Also, thank you for being the first guinea pig of every single one of the puzzles and riddles that I've ever introduced to my playgroup.
Oh, they're saints.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. But I actually had a puzzle in semi-recent memory that didn't really land the way I expected it to with my playgroup. And it was a puzzle that was based off of portraits, and the portraits showed creatures in them. And the idea was that the number of creatures in each of the portraits was different, and they were supposed to take that number and find the, like, spell out the word of those creatures and take the letter that was however many of those creatures in, and then figure out the order of the portraits, which there's clues for that. And then they were supposed to say that word out loud, and it was going to open a door. Ultimately, my party just plowed through the door eventually, and I allowed it to happen because it was taking longer than I wanted. This puzzle was meant to be challenging to a degree. It was meant to take some of their time. It took nearly a full play session.
Yeah.
And that was not my intent.
Oops.
And I was trying to hint to it without giving it away. And I think a lot of that, it not landing, was my initial descriptions. I breezed through it because I think I'd practiced it too much to a point where, to me, this puzzle now felt easy because I already knew the answer. And I had workshopped it like 20 times with my wife to the point that she knew the answer before I finished asking it.
Yeah.
And so it seemed easy now. So I ran through it. Now, I still recommend workshop it, but keep in mind, when you're trying to judge the difficulty of your puzzles, you know the answer. And that innately makes it easy to you. It doesn't necessarily mean easy now. And it's okay, like we've talked about so much on this podcast, it's okay to pivot. It's also okay in those moments to give hints.
Yep.
It's okay. One thing a puzzle that I had did go well, it was more of a riddle.
Yeah.
In a one-off session that I was trying to get my party to say happy birthday to another player. Yeah. And it worked. And he won the day because he got told happy birthday.
Yep.
That one worked really well, but I had a NPC designed to give hints. It was a Sphinx. It was also what asked the riddle, but it would give hints. It just would get angry every time it had to give a hint and it would attack the party. But
Yep.
that was just fun.
Yeah, and you did land a good few hits on that one too. I remember that.
Yeah.
So traps are another thing that you will see in Dungeons and Dragons, especially in dungeons. Sometimes the old like spike pit kind of gets overused sometimes.
Yep. Shout out Mortal Kombat 2.
I think sometimes it's just fun to see. Well, actually, so we had a story about my rogue. She was going to pick the lock into this room that they were trying to sneak into because they had heard voices, like low rumbling voices, and goes to pick it, rolls a nat 1.
No.
Oh yeah. So goes in there and like picks. The lock is picked, and then the door handle falls off, and it's this old brass doorknob, and it's a rounded one. It goes ping, 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 like all the way down the hallway.
No.
On this stone. So of course the voices go, and so they like, oh no. And then the whole thing story, from there. But I say that because I'm not saying that the door was trapped necessarily, but giving the player the opportunity to see if it was trapped or not. She did a great job. She had rolled a great perception check, so she knew that there was no traps necessarily. She just knew the door was locked.
Right.
Giving your players, especially the ones that are trained for that, so rogues especially, sometimes if you have a dexterous character, a more dexterous character there. That's the word I'm looking for.
Like maybe a monk.
A monk, sometimes maybe a ranger or sorcerer. That you kind of specialize into that. It kind of gives them like that little. It gives them that niche, because you get the big fighter that he does his job is absorb a bunch of hit points and beat the snot out of everybody else. You have your cleric where their main job is to heal. You've got your wizard who casts spells. Well, what's everybody else going to do? Exactly. So these guys get kind of that specialty James Bond, Born Identity type stuff to where they can just kind of sneak around and do their thing. All of that to say, bringing it full circle to traps, there's a bunch of different trap ideas out online. I mean, you can look on Reddit forums, you can look on Facebook forums that people have put together. I mean, there are a lot of really good traps.
We say it doesn't always have to be a spike pit. Sometimes spike pits are fun. Sometimes busting out your best campy Indiana Jones trap is fun. It's all about reading your group. It's all about understanding the dungeon you're in. I would say a ball rolling down a steep incline.
I was literally just thinking about that. Yeah.
Yeah. That can be a fun trap for like a cave that it's maybe not necessarily that important of a cave.
Mm-hmm.
It's one that we're having fun. We're in here. We're having a good time. Storyline wise, we're not really advancing it. So I'm going to throw in this campy trap. It's going to be a fun, entertaining thing. They're going to get around it. We're going to laugh about it later.
Or like if you get like the little spike holes on the side, they're like like poisonous darts that shoot out if you miss the tripwire or something like that.
But DMs, honestly, what the most fun thing is to hit your party with a couple of traps and then go through the next 40 sessions where they're so paranoid for traps. As a DM, that makes me so satisfied. I'm not going to lie.
So as we've talked about on this show, we've talked about a bathtub that one of our players is completely scared of. Again, this is a non-canon episode that this was introduced, and this player is the PC, not the player, the PC is completely mortified of anything that has to do with the bathtub. And so now we throw them in intentionally to make, just to poke fun at his character, which God bless him.
So we had a part of this. This happened in my play group. And again, this one-off session that the tub happened in, I actually was absent for this. It was one of the few times that my play group met without me. And I heard about it after the fact, and it took me a little bit to get kind of caught up on the joke. But then any opportunity I could get to have Shay's character and this player's character in a room with a bathtub, I took it. Absolutely. It could be they walk into a shop together. There's a bathtub. They're on a ship together and they're roommates. Of course there's a bathtub in their room. Now, to
be fair, he had been confined to his bedding for an 8-hour stint. And right across the room from his bed was a brass-legged tub that he had to stare at for 8 hours because he could not get out of said bedding.
It was not a good night's sleep.
It was a terrible night's sleep for him, and it was absolutely hilarious for everybody else at the table.
Yeah, and so listeners, you might be laughing, you might be listening to this and going, what's so great about a bathtub?
So the bathtub was actually a mimic. And for those of you who know what mimics are, it's literally what it sounds like. It is a monster that tries to eat you while looking like something else.
Yep. And this player got into a bathtub. That was actually a mimic.
And the problem is that bathtub rolled a really, really good fight that time. And he just had a hard time. Like, it had him constrained. It had him restrained. He could not get out of said bathtub for a solid 6 rounds. And so, yeah, we're laughing about it now, but
he was in panic mode.
He was for a hot second. It was hilarious.
There's something about being a player in that this is something I love about one-offs in nature. You can do goofy things like this.
Yeah.
There's something about when you're a player, especially if you're having a good time in a campaign line, when you hit something in a story, whether it's part of your campaign or maybe in a one-off session that you struggled with. I don't know. It's almost like this moment. They're like, am I really that good at this game? And I get there sometimes as a DM when it's 45 sessions in a row that my dice can't roll better than a 7.
But it's also like playing golf, you could have a terrible round up for 17 holes and then you nail an eagle on the 18th hole and you're like, I'm coming back again. I'm going to do this again.
Well, it's then you don't tell the story about that 103 you just shot it so that you got an eagle.
Well, yeah. Instead of having 105, it's 103 now.
Exactly. People who don't understand golf are probably going, what the heck? Now, I want to ask you, Shay, because you talked about this earlier. You talked about there's something special about being underground in Dungeons and Dragons. I think when we talk about dungeons, we do tend to think about that underground, dark, damp, musty dungeon. Is that to mean that in order to have a good dungeon, you have to take your players underground?
No.
Can you tell us about a time that you were maybe in an above ground dungeon that stands out to your memory that you liked?
Honestly, if you find a good temple, usually if you have an organization that's very religious based, if it's let's just pick a deity. Let's say it's a temple to Asmodeus, right?
Yep.
So Asmodeus, aka the god of tyranny in the world of Dungeons and Dragons, is a very uptight, clean, on time type person.
Stick in the mud.
Yeah, very. Yeah, I mean,
I think that's how he's written.
Well, he's lawful. He is lawful evil. So he is law abiding, but he has evil motives. Okay, that's basically what it boils down to.
Well, and wielding the law for his own personal.
Correct. Yes. So, if you go into a temple of Asmodeus, it's probably going to be a very clean. There's not going to be mold or algae or whatever on the walls. I mean, it's going to be a very uptight kept type organization. So you're not going to run into a lot of the pitfalls that you might run into in a dark and dusty cave.
Yep.
You'll probably find some more like sleight of hand type tricks. You'll find some more like hidden weapon type things.
Yep.
That could be
enchanted stuff.
Yes.
In place of like where you'd use a slime or a zombie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You would have actual like dress guards that would be like, you there, stop. And then said fight would happen.
And you can go Metal Gear Solid with the exclamation point. and of course, hiding in a box.
Yes. I will say though, when it comes to encounters in your dungeons and things like that, make sure that it's organic, but not overloading. So what do I mean by that? So when you're in a dungeon, and let's just say for sake purposes, you're infiltrating an organization's place, right? So you're in a dungeon. If you get in a fight with somebody and you cast something like Thunder Wave, which can be heard from 300 feet, you can't make the people in the next room not hear it.
Exactly.
It doesn't make sense logically. It doesn't make sense storyline wise, right? So if you have somebody who casts Thunder Wave or has somebody get chopped in half by an axe and the person who gets chopped up goes you can't tell me the people down the hall didn't hear it. So I think keep it realistic is more or less like what I'm trying to get at.
I think a lot of those problems stem from us as dungeon masters not wanting our players to fail.
True.
I think we want them to succeed. We want them to get through the dungeon. That's fine. There's a degree of that is okay and healthy, and that because you do not want to be rooting against your players, but also they'll never learn to be stealthy in a dungeon if you don't reinforce that stealth is important in a dungeon ever in your campaign. If they can cast Thunder Wave and get away with it when it should be heard from 300 feet away and it's instead missed apparently 10 feet down the hall.
Yeah, not to mention like echo, like walls in caves will echo. You get all that sound that has to go somewhere.
Adding to this, I remember very well semi-early on in my campaign, a time where my group was going in very much an above ground dungeon. It was a destroyed city. Mm-hmm. They entered into the city, found a young dragon, did semi-battle with the dragon. The dragon flew away. They later then find that there was a group there worshiping that dragon and are not too happy that it left. And then one of the players confesses to this group that they're the ones that ran off the dragon. Yep. And so that, of course, leads to a battle. It led to one of the players getting stabbed while his back was turned to kick off this battle. That's all about giving consequences. Mm-hmm. Now, my consequence in this case was that not that the player wasn't being stealthy, but that the player was not being discreet. He was being forthcoming with information that the rest of the party was trying to hide.
Yep.
And this was not the player trying to be a jerk. This was not our friend at the table deciding to go against others. This was him staying true to his character. And his character needing a kind of coming of age moment. And DMs, if you're fortunate enough to have a player who understands his character like that and it will play him true to that moment, it can be really fun. Sometimes you do have to egg that out of your players, but it starts with kind of teaching them, hey, there's going to be moments where you don't do the right thing. Maybe you fight the dragon instead of talking to it, and then maybe you tell the tale.
Now, granted, if you walk into a dungeon going doop 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 doop, doop like you're not really paying attention, like you're just asking for a big fight. Yep. Biggest thing is like work with your players. Say, okay, tell me what you're going to do. Okay, I want you to tell me walk me through what you're doing. If that case they go, well, we walk into the cave. Okay, do you just walk in? Yep. Okay then. And then you go from there. If you say, okay, are you going to walk into a cave? Yep. How are you going to do it? Well, we're going to take a position here. We're going to kind of sneak our way in a little bit. Okay. Then that takes your whole thing into a different thing. Maybe you can get the jump on that first group of minions that you have. Maybe they do stumble on a team lead or like kind of somebody a little bit higher up the food chain in that first room who's not paying attention. So give and take with your players to really make that come together.
There's an age-old question in Dungeons & Dragons for us DMs. How much do we baby our party?
Yep.
Do you always ask whenever it's time to be stealthy? Do you ask them, are you being stealthy? And I think the answer to that is not cut and dry, black and white, yes or no. I think the answer to this question of should you baby them here, you kind of have to take in the moment. For my group, if we haven't played in a while, if we've missed a couple of what should have been our sessions, I might tee it up a bit more to try to get them back into the gear of thinking about the situation. But if we just played 3 weeks ago and we've all been talking about this, we're rip-roaring ready to go, everybody had their books out, and they walk in and they didn't say they were stealthy, maybe I skip saying roll for your stealth check and instead just go, well, you walked in confident, you made noise, now they know you're here. You
failed to tell me how you walked in. Yeah. Yep. I also think it depends on how long they've been playing too.
Yeah, like experience level.
Yeah, and again, we've talked about before, like I have a nothing before 5th level rule. So, and mostly that was talking to character deaths, but I think at the same time, like I will work with you up until level 5, and I will work with you, period. But up until level 5, I will be a lot more lenient with certain things. Once you hit level 5, your character's been doing this long enough that they should know better than to just walk into an open space. It goes by, it's been 6 months since we played, or they're still really brand new to the game in general.
This is something people that also you can be talking about to your players in and out of game as the dungeon master, saying like, I want that little bit more of description when you guys are entering into rooms. Mm-hmm. Also, there's stuff that you can do as a dungeon master that kind of tees up for them to do it without teeing them up, without holding their hand, asking for walking order. Yep. I've gotten my group so trained from me asking over and over again walking order that now they just give me it.
Yep.
Every time.
Yep.
And I love that because there's actually a few times I would have forgotten to ask. And so it's helped me in reverse and they don't even realize it. But that also gets them thinking, because if they're having to say, we're walking with the warrior and the cleric in front, followed by the warrior, and then our other warriors in the back, or the druids in back.
Yep.
They're already now thinking, all right, why are we in this order? We strategically thought out this order. Mm-hmm. Now they're more likely to think about, are we being stealthy? And also knowing that they're leading with the clankiest because they put their tank in front. So that stealth check might come with disadvantage. So that's actually something that I've listened to them talk for 15 minutes before when I had no plan for there to be anyone listening to them. But DMs let that happen. Let them talk about it. Let them plan it out because they're in it now. Mm-hmm. They're submerged if they're doing that.
For sure. So guys, in total detail, we kind of went on a little bit of a tangent, but it does definitely tie in, I think, when it comes to dungeons, specifically more for like traps and puzzles. I think it's one of those things where you kind of gauge your players, you kind of gauge the reason why they're in said dungeon. If it's more of a hideout type thing, then there'll probably be a lot more encounter focused, whether if it's just a random cave dungeon thing that they will stumble on a big dragon potentially or whatever. There's just going to be different challenges. So, but I think also being weary of having a good amount of traps and puzzles for them to engage with the setting to really pull out the full experience of it too is a big thing.
Yeah. And Shay, I want to ask one last question. I know we're going a little bit long here. Do you think it would ever be okay to have a full dungeon that does not have an encounter? It's all puzzles or all traps.
That's just puzzles and traps?
Yeah. No encounter. Because I know there are dungeons that are all encounters. And I've played through those as both DM and player.
Yeah.
Been sitting here trying to think, have I ever played through a dungeon that was
I can't say I've ever had one of those. I think a lot of what I've been through are more organization bases underground. So not really have much just free caves. Mm-hmm. I can't honestly think of one.
Yeah. Now, I don't think anyone listening to this, if you've encountered that, I would love to hear about that. Or if you've ran that, I would love to hear about that. And guys, I know listeners, we didn't go into detail here on this episode how to build a puzzle, how to build a trap. We just talked more about like traps that we ran into, resources you can find. If you would like us to ever dive more into that, of how we built ones, or maybe running through one we specifically did, please let us know at
dungeonmastertalk@gmail.com, or you can hit us up on Twitter with the @DMT the podcast handle. We would love to talk with you there, or you can hit us up on Facebook on the Dungeon Master Talk podcast page. We would love to talk to you and honestly hear about a different type of dungeon that we haven't even encountered yet.
Right. And if you want us to see something that you're tweeting about that's related to maybe dungeons or anything Dungeons and Dragons, you can also use the hashtag dungeonmastertalk.
And for all of us here at DMT, he is Kyle, I am Shay, and we will see you next time on Dungeon Master Talk.